Hello everybody and welcome to part number 9. We are going to be looking a little bit about joining and separating pieces and a little bit about the delete menu. It's not really exactly intuitive, but it's really easy once you see how it's done. So there is a little rule that we have to remember. Only one object can be in edit mode at a time. You can never edit two separate objects. Now that doesn't mean two separate things can't be joined together in one object, and then you can work on each one, but basically only one object at a time can be in edit mode. So a lot of times people would be working inside of Blender, and let's just say that they have a sphere, and they have it in edit mode, and they've been working on this and moving it around and doing all kinds of things to it. Then they think, well, let me add another sphere, or let me add a cube to this. So they do Shift and A and go to add a cube. The first thing that you're going to notice is that I get the mesh menu right away. Normally, don't we get the mesh and then a flyout menu for this? So let me show you that. We usually get the add menu and then have our mesh as a flyout menu. But in edit mode, you get right to the mesh menu, and you can add to it, and you'll see that it's also in edit mode. So these are actually one object. Even though there's two separate parts to it, it is one object. So when I click on it, I select them both. When I deselect the one, I deselect them both. It's one object. Now, if I were to use Shift and A again and add a mesh torus, you'll see that this is a separate object all on its own. When I click on it, that's the only thing that's selected. So again, only one item can be in edit mode at a time, although you can have as many objects in your scene as you want to. So each one of these are their own little toruses, and then, or tori, and then you have these two which are joined. We can also take all of these and we can join them all. So how to do that is Control plus J. Control plus J will make them all one. So if I deselect everything and click on any one of them, they all become selected because they're all now one object, which means I can now edit them all at the same time. So that's a handy little way of looking at things. Now we can't just click on one of these and unjoin it, because when we select one, we select them all. So you can't unjoin things in object mode. You must go into edit mode to do that. And now what you have the ability to do is to select anything that you want to, whether it's a vertex, a whole object, two objects, anything you want, and you can separate it, but it needs to be selected. So one selection choice that we didn't talk about before, what's called island select. And if we were to just hover over one of these islands or parts, we could hit our L key and it will select that entire object, or that entire part of our object. Hitting L again, we can select another, another, and another. This, of course, works with Shift and L to deselect that whole object as well, or that whole portion of the object. So I'm going to go ahead and select this one up here. And now I'm going to use my Separate menu. So that is done with the P key. If I hit P for Separate, you'll see I can separate by selection. And when I click on this, it automatically pops into object mode. Again, that's because only one object can be in edit at a time. And since we've separated this from this, this can no longer be in edit mode as well. So Blender automatically throws it into object mode. We can also select all of this and hit P, and we can choose to do it by loose parts. So even though these are all part of the same object, None of them actually share any geometry. None of their geometry is connected together. So we can use P and we can separate by loose parts. When we do this, all of them will become objects, except for one. And there you have it. Each one of these is an object. So I can click on, whoops, I can click on them all separately. Alright, something else that we have here within our objects is what's called the origin. And right now you can see that when I click on this box, its origin is all the way over here. This is a little peach dot. If I click on this one, you'll notice that its origin is over here as well. The reason that is because when these were all one piece, they all shared the same origin. When I separated them, the origin remained where it was. The simple reason for that is that an origin cannot move while you are in edit mode. So I can come in here and put this in edit. And when I take it and grab it and move it, you'll see that that origin stays put. You again cannot move this while you are in edit mode. What we do have the ability to do is to manipulate it while we're in object mode. So here in the tool shelf, come down to where it says join object, or set origin. When you click on it, you get a menu of 4 choices. The first one that you're going to be using a lot is geometry to origin. And when I click on this, you notice that the geometry moved to where the origin is. I can also do origin to geometry, and that will snap it the other way. Now the origin is moved here. Either one of those two that you use, you are making the origin the absolute center of the object. So it's lined up perfectly now. This one is still, however, over there, as is this one, and that one. So something else that you can do is you can set your origin to your cursor. So let's say I wanted to line up the origins all at the same place. So I have my cursor centered with Shift plus C. Now when I click on this object, I can do set origin to cursor, and there it is. This one I can also set origin to cursor. I also have the ability to click on this one and choose origin to center of mass. And it came into the center of this one, just like it does when it goes to origin to geometry. But if I had all of these selected and used Control J to join them, the origin is down here at the cursor, and that is definitely not at the center of the mass. It's just centered to the scene right now. So if I go to set origin, I can do origin to center of mass. And now you'll see that it is in the average center of all of these items together, as if they're one item. Alright? So that's important because as you're modeling, you're going to want to line things up. And learning how to line things up using your origin and using your cursor and using your geometry becomes really important for making and creating things the way that you want to. So let me give you just a tiny example of that. I'm going to right click on this vertex here. And now I'm going to use the snap menu. And the snap menu is Shift plus S. Shift and S gives me selection to grid, selection to cursor offset. Let me move this over a little bit. We also have cursor to selected. And that's actually what I want. I want to move my cursor from the center of the grid to that corner of my box. So now you see the cursor is around that actual vertice. Now I can go into object mode, and I can go to Set Origin, Origin to the Cursor. And so now my cursor is here with my origin at the corner of this box. Now this is not going to matter when it goes into Second Life, but it does matter as far as modeling goes and lining things up to each other. So what I want you to do is I want you to practice a little bit going into edit mode, going into object mode, joining and separating pieces either by selection or by loose parts, and manipulating the cursor around and the origin around, just getting familiar with it. That's going to do you a lot of good. Another thing that happens is that your last object selected when you're joining them is going to be kind of like the parent. So it's a lot like the root prim when you have something inside a Second Life. So if I were to join this one and this, this one and this one and this one as the last one selected and hit Control J, you will see, oh, the origin is still there because I didn't set the origin back to where it belonged. Okay, so let me separate those real quick. I'm going to go ahead and go to Origin to Geometry. Now, this origin is down here, this one is down here, and this one is in its own geometry center. So I'll click on this upper one, shift click on the other, and then this final one. Control J, you will now see snaps here. That means that this is the center for all of these. And again, if I do select all and separate by loose parts, each one of these origin is down here now. So it's just really something that you want to get used to doing, is having the ability to manipulate your cursor and your origin and things like that. This also has a lot to do with our pivot points, which we'll get into at a later time. So let me go ahead and let's see what happens when let me select all of this and delete it. And I'm going to go ahead and center my cursor with Shift and C. Use Shift and A to bring in a mesh plane. And I'm going to go into edit mode and give this some subdivisions. So 10 is good to start with. The first thing that we have to know is that in different mesh select modes, our delete choices will act differently. A lot of them you're going to experiment with. It's really going to be a tough thing to describe them all to you here and now, but I'm going to show you a few of the more common ones. So right now I am in Vertex Select, and you can tell because my vertices are actually showing up on my mesh, and of course because this button is highlighted, which means it's selected. If I select this vertex here and I hit my delete key and I choose to delete the vertices, you will see that that whole face disappears. The reason that face disappears is because it cannot exist without its edges, and its edges cannot exist without a vertice on either end of it. Remember that? An edge must have a vertex at each end. So getting rid of that vertex made the edges disappear and the face disappear. Now, if we select two edge loops together and we hit delete, and let's say we want to delete faces, you can see that it gets rid of the whole face, and it also gets rid of those vertices that were going down along this side. So that's pretty handy. If we go into face select and we choose some random faces and we hit delete and we delete by faces, again it deletes just those faces. It doesn't delete the edges along the side of it, because if we had done this and in Vertex Select and we hit delete and chose vertices, You see, we lose much more geometry that way. So that's something to play with. One tool that I really love is the delete for edge loops. And if I click on delete and choose edge loops at the bottom, you can see it got rid of that edge loop right there in between. So now I've got that much less geometry. This counted in SL before. Let me do this. This 2 sets of faces would have been 4 triangles in Second Life. But now it's only 2. So I've gained myself, or I've cut down my geometry quite a bit. And you can do this over and over, cleaning up your edge loops, getting rid of the ones that you don't need. This is actually how we would have done that sphere at the beginning of our class when I was talking about, starting with the lowest piece of geometry possible. So that's fun. But don't confuse that with other deletion choices, such as edge collapse. This all just collapses like it says. Kind of just shrinks into an actual vertex, and that's about it. We also have what's called dissolve. So dissolving vertices works nice, but what happens now is this is a big n-gon. So you have a big n-gon here, and this is going to be quite a few triangles. If you were to use delete and choose dissolve edges, you'll see that it pretty much does the same thing. Sometimes when you delete edges like this, see if I can get it to do it, or dissolve edges. Oh, it's not doing it. What used to happen is that you would dissolve the edges, but the vertices would stay there. They must have changed that a little bit. And that's actually pretty nice for us. Because if you would dissolve the edge, like here, let me try it with just one. The vertices would still stay there. So you would end up having a piece of mesh that looked, well, that vertice disappeared. That's pretty odd. It didn't do that before. I'm kind of happy about that. So again, depending on which mode you're in, and depending on what you have selected, when you hit that X or that delete key, take a look at your choices and practice a little bit with them. Don't get frustrated when you first start trying to clean up your mesh or delete things and you don't get the effect that you wanted to get or that you expected to get. Simply hit Control Z and try again. It would be to your benefit to just really make a few mistakes. Making the mistakes on that's going to teach you a lot more later on. Alright, so that is separate, that is joining, that is things about the origin and the snapping of the cursor, and I think you are good to go for this lesson. So please make sure that you do bring in a plane. Give it some subdivisions. Bring in a ball and give it some, it's got a lot of edge loops on it to begin with. So you can make some deletions and see the way that that all works. Alright, we will catch you at the next one. Please make sure that you subscribe and encourage others to watch if they're wanting to learn Blender. The next video is going to be all about modifiers and how they work. I will give a demonstration of a couple of the most used modifiers that we have. And yeah, enjoy.